Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar channel of the Association of Certified eDiscovery Specialists. My name is Mike Quadraro. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we are joined by our partner, Conduent, for a webinar entitled Flexibility When It Matters Most, a product showcase on Viewpoint. We'll get to the presentation in a moment, but before we get started, please know we love questions. We're happy to take questions. Please use the widget on your screen, the Q&A widget on your screen, to submit your questions. Also, if you'd like a copy of today's slide deck, it should be available in the resource widget also on your screen. Without further delay, I am super pleased and excited to introduce Joe Turner, who will take the presentation from here. Joe, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. First of all, I want to thank ACEDS, Michael, yourself, and Pete for joining us. So again, my name is Joe Turner, and I am a Senior Solutions Engineer for Conduent. I'm also the manager of our legal product portfolio. So we're here today to talk about Viewpoint, which is our end-to-end eDiscovery tool. And we've invited Pete Pepperton on as well. Pete's been a licensed user of Viewpoint for, I think, going on about 8 years now. Pete?
Somewhere in there.
Yep. So I didn't know if you wanted to introduce yourself before we got started, Pete.
Hi, Pete Pepperton. I run the eDiscovery operation at Dinsmore & Shoal, based in our Cincinnati office. How are you?
All right, great. So a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about Conduent first, and then we're going to get into a couple PowerPoint slides, but that's it. And then we're going to spend actually most of the time actually in the product looking at some of the cool features and functionalities of Viewpoint, and then we'll wrap it up at the end. So Conduent is an end-to-end eDiscovery solutions and technology provider. Been in the business for a number of years. You might have known us as Xerox Litigation Services. So we spun off from Xerox corporate proper in 2017. We have facilities across the US and the world. We provide all your standard eDiscovery eDiscovery services such as collections and processing and hosting. We have services, managed review. We have services around those, and we also have products. The product we're here to talk about today is Viewpoint. So Viewpoint itself is been around for about 20 years. So it was developed in 2003, and it is a full end-to-end product, meaning that it's got a front-end processing and ingestion where it supports thousands of file types, and it does all your standard eDiscovery processing. And then sort of on the back end, or sort of the user interface, it's got all the review and analytics and productions you would expect from an application as well. The key thing about Viewpoint is because it's been developed over the last 20 years, but it's been developed, the processing and review and analytics tool have been developed together, right? So both products are just as mature as each other. And then so it's also, how would you expect, it's scalable, right? So you can process, gigabytes and terabytes of data. And it's really, flexible in its deployment models and the way that you can customize it. And that's just kind of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, right? What makes it flexible, what makes it, customizable, and how it can advance your eDiscovery matter. So just going to go to the next slide here. First, we're going to talk about deployment models. So Viewpoint is a tool that can be deployed in many different manners. Traditionally, it's been a local deployment, meaning that somebody can actually buy a license of Viewpoint, and if they have the ability to host the infrastructure and to maintain it, it's something they can put behind their firewall, right? Since then, we've also offered cloud deployments. So it is an infrastructure that you can put in Azure or Oracle's OCI cloud or some sort of cloud. Also, we have a managed services environment, right? So if it's an environment that you don't, or infrastructure that you don't want to maintain, however, you want to push all the buttons of loading data and processing it and hosting the review, managing the review, we can offer a dedicated environment, which we call the managed services deployment. And then lastly here, of course, there's the traditional SaaS model, which is, we have a repository up in Albany, New York, and we have one right outside of London in the UK, where we host clients' data. So Pete, I know that you went with the deployment model, the local deployment model. I was wondering just if you could talk about a little bit about the factors that helped you drive to that deployment model.
Right. So that's what we chose when we launched, like you said, in the 8 years ago timeframe, and that was what the firm was most comfortable with. We are, like everyone, in the process of migrating to the cloud, and some stuff will go first, and some stuff will go last, and our stuff will go somewhere in the middle there. But the firm was concerned about security and cost, and wanted other entities to blaze the path in getting away from a local deployment model, and let us learn on other firms' nickel. And now that that's largely been done, you'll start to see us, as you're starting to see lots of other firms, moving more and more of the operations to the cloud. So we'll be there tomorrow, or in 25 years, or somewhere in between. But that's the main reason we're local now. It's the result of an historic decision that was the right fit for us at the time.
Yeah, and we still, offer to plan these deployment models because, some clients, like you said, still have the needs to have something local. But as we also see that many people are moving to the cloud as well.
And that's largely driven now, right, by not just the need to get there, but I don't want to say people putting the brakes on, right, like that's a bad thing, but there's a healthy tension between let's get there and let's get there the right way. So there's lots of IG concerns, and we're certainly going to want to make sure that we're not migrating more than we need to the cloud.
Okay. So we're going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so this is really the only slide we're going to see on Viewpoint, right? Because we're going to jump into the application and start looking at it. But like I said, it's a full end-to-end eDiscovery platform, right? The nice thing about Viewpoint is, in essence, it is a single fixed cost. We don't have user fees. All the analytics are built into the tool. Most of them are our analytics, so there's no additional licensings or costs. You use them when it makes sense, and when you're not using them, you don't have to worry about wasting that money. Also, it's like I said, the flexible deployment models also have some flexibility as far as the interface goes. So traditionally, Viewpoint has been an application that you could install on your machine, or you could access via Citrix, and we still develop that. But we've also, over the last 5 or 6 years, developed sort of a sister interface that's basically browser-based. So it just looks a little bit more modern. And both applications are available. Both interfaces are available for a Viewpoint platform. And then most clients just decide that certain user groups might use the browser interface, where others might want to use the application interface. And then recently we started integrating some of the Azure Cognitive Services into the tool seamlessly. So we're going to take a look at those today, and then obviously we're going to take a look at the analytics. So that's it as far as the PowerPoint goes. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we'll just start diving into the product and taking a look at some of the features there. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, Pete, can you give me a yay or a nay whether you can see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so what I thought we would do is we're just going to walk through the product, just sort of from that front end processing and ingestion back to the the review and analytics side. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in processing because I want to get to the analytics and the review, which is the tool that that most users of Viewpoint are going to be accessing. But I did want to point out some things in processing. Like I mentioned, it's fully scalable, right? So you can process gigabytes and terabytes of data. So we work on a worker-based model, meaning that there's a bunch of machines behind Viewpoint that are just ready to have jobs submitted to it, right? So the more of those machines you have available to you, the more data you can process. So we can really scale to just about any sort of matter size. And as far as eDiscovery processing tasks, it does everything you would expect it to do, right? So from identifying the type of file that you're processing, generating hash values, extracting metadata and text and, family members and keeping those all together. It does everything you would expect it to be able to do, right? We worked left to right across the screen. One of the things I just wanted to point out about the processing application is, it's very templatized, meaning that we try to make it easy to, get the ball rolling, right? And that's as easy as, from starting a new project. If you wanted to create a new matter, it's just a simple right click. And if I click new, then it would create for me a new matter that has sort of some standard settings on how you want to handle certain file types or how you want to, to handle certain processing tasks. Or if you maybe have a client that they like or a review team that like processing and reviewing data a certain way all the time, then it's just a right click, and you can also say duplicate project structure. And in essence, that will replicate all of the settings for that matter into a new matter. So Pete, I was wondering, if you could kind of talk a little bit about, some of the ways that you utilize templates within the processing and review application. Do you guys use those frequently?
We do. One of the mantras here, well, the number one mantra is always park for egress. My girls will tell you that they get made fun of all the time for backing into parking spots. But one of the big ones here is I don't really care how we do it, but let's do it a way, right? Let's pick the best way. And Joe, you've seen and you've been part of sessions where we sort of stop all work for a day, and we'll do this every other year or so, and say, let's refresh what we're doing, right? And let's come up with the best way to do things. And then if somebody's got a use case that's outside of that and they can sell the notion of why they need something different, that's fine. And if they need that on a routine basis, then we create a separate template for that. But the last thing we want to do is making individualized decisions through the mad array of decisions that you have to make when you're going to process a large amount of data. Is making individualized decisions and then forgetting what something 10th or 12th down the line in importance is supposed to be because you're really focused on the top things, and then making a mistake or just not choosing the optimal option that's going to change slightly what happens downstream, and that's going to change something else slightly, and all of a sudden you've got something that's a lot different than you're expecting. So we really like the templates. We want to have a swim lane. We want to have one single, only this way swim lane. That's a little impractical. So we develop a few. We've sort of got a main default, and then you've got use case A, B, C, and then from there we modify as necessary individual characteristics on a given project. Or if we've got something that looks more like a portfolio, then we might say, well, let's actually templatize that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and you can use those templates throughout the product, right? So I just happened to open up here the project processing settings, right? So it just lists for you all of the different ways that you might want to process data, right? And those are categorized by how you want to handle the NIST files, right? Or how do you want to handle a text extraction? Do you want to identify foreign languages or not? So all of those very granular settings, you can templatize those, and you can save those, and you can create multiple ones, as Pete sort of referenced. Right? So not only sort of creating templates, but there's also creating efficiencies in the workflow. So if you think about these tasks, you go in and you select a set of data and you say, okay, I want to start processing this data. Well, after it's processed, maybe you want to index it, and then maybe you want to dedupe it, and then maybe you want to push it to review. Do some keyword searchings. All of that can be, you can place that in the workflow so it's all automated as well. One of the things I did want to mention before we sort of jump into the review application is, we support thousands of file types in their native format, meaning, we don't, from a review perspective, you don't need to standardize everything to PDF or TIFF. We support thousands of file types in the review application into native format. Some of those recent ones, you'll see we have over 3,000 or so different file types here. But some of the recent formats are the popular chat formats. So you'll see here we support, Skype and Slack and iChat and WhatsApp and most recently Teams. And I'll show you in the review interface how we visualize those for the reviewers as well. But that kind of led to the question I wanted to ask you, Pete. Do you guys see yourselves coming across chats more frequently now in your collections? And if so, maybe what applications that you find you're collecting more than others?
Yeah, so obviously native texting, although I rather expect you weren't asking about native texting applications. But that's your ABC, or maybe that's the ABC you're going to show in a second. Oh my God, I hope I haven't given away the store here. But the top three are probably the top three that other people who sit in my chair at other firms would see, right? And that's Slack, Teams, and WhatsApp. A little bit of Facebook Messenger maybe, and right now I'm sure there's two guys in a garage in Palo Alto somewhere that are creating the next thing that I'm going to have to deal with next week.
Yep. It's certainly a challenge from a processing perspective, right? Because each one of those applications exports data to its own kind of format, right? Like Teams normally exports to a PST file, whereas Slack does it to a bunch of JSONs that are wrapped up in a zip, right? So certainly a challenge to support those natively, which we do. But then I think you'll like the way that we visualize those formats in the document viewer. Okay, so that was really it as far as the processing application, right? It's again very robust. It can do everything you would expect it to be able to do, and we think it does it really well. So with that having said that, I'm going to spend the rest of the demonstration in the review and analytics side of the tool. And then again, this is the application that most of your users are going to be accessing, right? I happen to have opened both the classic application, which you can look at here, and the browser interface, which I have open here, just to kind of show you that they are very similar to each other, right? So it's easy to sort of jump back and forth between the two. So you'll see they have, your document list between both of them and your document viewer, your the same tagging panels. Because again, it's the same repository, you're just accessing it via a different interface. So like I said earlier, we have some clients that maybe there's certain roles within the firm or organization that sort of gravitate towards the browser interface, whereas others might gravitate towards, the classic application. Okay, and we'll spend some time in both. All right. So from the review perspective, right, again, not that I want to downplay everything that Viewpoint has, because it's got all the functionality you would expect a review application to have, but that's exactly it, right? So everything from navigating docs and, viewing documents in different formats, right? So, inherently it's a native review tool, but you can also have the text version that's available, or HTML or TIFF, or, if it's been produced. We keep track of, all the other times it's been produced. And so you can see the productions that it went out in and what it was numbered and what it actually looked like, right? It's got all your redaction functionality users expect it to be able to have. And we have native redactions for Excel and CSV files as well. So again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on those because it's got the review functionality that you would expect a eDiscovery tool to have, right? So really, I wanted to spend some time just talking about some of the analytics, which I think we visualize pretty well, and also that they're included with the tool at no additional cost. So those analytics that we include, and I'm just going to go back to the dashboard here, is near duplicate analytics, which is where you do a side-by-side comparison of two docs, and then we sort of score them on how similar they are. Email thread analytics was just going to visualize you an entire email thread so you can see, what started the entire conversation, or, where did it sort of branch off, and what's the most recent email within the thread. Then we have our word clustering tool called Concept Analyzer, and then Relationship Analyzer. I'm going to touch on these a couple minutes each, and then we'll go into the browser interface and look at some additional analytics. Okay, so let's look at the email thread analytics first real quick. So the idea behind it is, you have an email and you might think to yourself, hey, I'd like to take a look at this email and the entire thread that it came from, right? You want to get the context of this email. So again, it's just a right click within the desktop application, and you just click on Email Thread Analyzer. And it's going to open up that email and then the entire thread that it came from. Okay, so I can see this blue email is the one that I spawned it from, and I can see it's it's like the third email within the entire thread, because the way that we've clustered it here is this very first email is the single email that started the entire discussion. We call it an email tree, and you can really think of this as the base of the tree, right? It's the trunk. And then you can just sort of follow one of these branches, in essence, right? Because each one of these is an email reply or a forward. And then you can sort of, you basically come to an endpoint, right? And that endpoint, or the tip of the branch, right? That's the most recent email you have for that thread, right, in the system. And you can see where it sort of branches off into different threads here. And you'll notice that those endpoints are highlighted in green. That's just a visual indication that that's a complete email, meaning that if you review that email, you will have reviewed all the other emails that preceded it, right? You'll see sometimes emails further up the tree that are highlighted in green as well. Well, it's because those had attachments that that didn't get included on a forward or reply. So you'll probably need to review those as well. So obviously, how clients use this the most is they use it to apply email suppression, right? So if you wanted to review all of these emails in as few emails as possible, you really only need to review the green ones, right? And a lot of other cool things here that we do as far as this cluster information is so where we keep track of people that have been added or removed between the email replies and forwards. So you'll see people appear in green and red, red meaning they've been removed, green meaning they've been added. And you can also see placeholders for missing emails, which is kind of a nice functionality. So here's an email from Jeff Brown talking about the lottery. That's actually a physical document you do not have on the system, right? So it either wasn't collected or wasn't given to you. But because when we build email thread analytics, we look for all these blocks of text, we were able to find that block of text in another email that you do have, and we're able to replicate in the tree where we believe that missing email falls, and we have that indicator there. Okay, so that's email thread analytics. And then I want to talk about near dupe analytics. Then Pete, I got a quick question for you after that. Email thread analytics, again, it's just where we're going to compare two docs side by side and see how similar they are. So the scenario here is I have a draft agreement, and I can see in this panel that I've got docked down here, it's got 6 near duplicates in the system, each one scored on how similar it is to my base document. And if I actually wanted to do open up and compare this base document to these near duplicates side by side, again, that's a right click. And I could select near dupe similarity viewer, and I could do that side by side comparison. So Pete, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, as far as analytics go, which analytics do you find? Well, one, do you incorporate analytics into your sort of standard, review workflow? And if so, which analytics do you capitalize on the most? Do you think?
So we don't automatically run them, just because there's some cases that they're not right for, and there's a small cost to pay, but they don't take very long to run in the background for the most part. But we discuss up front, right, what analytics people will use. Mail threading has proven to be very popular, mostly for the reason that you were describing, right, the suppression of included mails. So, in a 15 mail thread, you don't have to read any but the last, the exception of, people being added or taken out or attachments or whatever. But the inclusives, right, should be a number substantially smaller than 15 in an unusual 15 mail thread. So we find that to greatly enhance the speed and efficiency of a review team's work. We like the near duping, not necessarily for review workflow, but more of QC, and like maybe especially QC on the privilege process, where we get to take a look at privilege documents and say, well, what are the near dupes to this, and is the reason that it's not an exact dupe enough that it's no longer privileged, or is this a potential miss by the privilege review team, and that maybe they should have been able to catch that. So we're able to highlight those and sort of do a second pass and prove to ourselves that we got it right, or say, hey, here's a miss, and let's go back and adjust the coding properly, and maybe add a little retraining for the team on what review what privilege is in the particular instance.
And the nice thing about it is it really incorporating both of these analytics is truly just a checkbox, right? I mean, it's when you go to build a view and you say, okay, I want to go out and do this search, this date or these keywords, and I want to pull in my results. However, I only want the most complete emails. It's really just a checkbox of that ETA suppression.
Right.
And near dupe the same, right? If you could say, okay, I've got my results, but hey, now I want to add to it any near duplicates. And again, it's also just a checkbox.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We also use the concept analyzer, but I don't think you've quite covered that yet, right?
Yeah, have not. So that's the other two. So these, I think those two analytics we just looked at, they sort of help facilitate a review, right? Like while you're reviewing documents, you can look at complete threads or you can look at near duplicates, right? The other two analytics, it's probably a dated term, the whole early case assessment, right? But it's more of a big data analytics, which is also probably a dated term. But the idea there is, let's look at the relationship analytics first, actually, because then that kind of ties into concepts. But so relationship analytics is an analytics for email. And the whole idea behind it is it's basically without knowing nothing about your email document population, you can run relationship analytics to get a list of all the domains that are referenced in that population and all the persons, right? So here are two lists. You can easily filter down the lists. You can easily share the lists, right? So for example, I say, okay, I've loaded a bunch of PST data. Well, I want to quickly isolate all of my, privileged domains, all my privileged communications, email that came from a privileged domain, because maybe I want to, funnel those to a potentially privileged review, right? Same thing with, maybe mass tagging, domains that come from, ESPN or whatever the case may be. But also the same thing for persons, right? So here's a list of all the persons that are referenced in that document population, again, so you can share it. Or you might ask yourself questions like, hey, did I know that there was some AOL communications in here, right? Was somebody sending something to a domain they shouldn't have, or do I need to collect some data that may have been missed? So at a very high level, it just gives you these lists, which prove to be very useful in sort of dictating what you do or don't want to review. But it's also sort of an investigative analytics, right? So again, the scenario here is, yeah, I know that Sarah Shackleton has emails, right? This is her PSTs. What I'm really interested in is who she's talking to. So if I double click on Sarah Shackleton, then I can get that information. So here is a list of all the persons that she's been talking to within this document population. So I get a list of the person, the domain they came from, and then, how often she's been talking to them. And again, easy for me to sort of filter down or search these lists. So again, if I was maybe interested in, has she been communicating with anybody from outside counsel? Yeah, she was communicating with these three people. Or maybe I'm interested in that AOL domain, right? Did I know that she was communicating with, Jim at an AOL account? Is that important for me to know, right? Remove that filter. So then also, not only who she's been talking to, but, the time span, right? So I can see here that her communication spans about a year, right? So I can see when she was actively sending and receiving, but maybe more importantly, I see gaps, right? So if there was a big 6-month chunk in here that was missing, was that data that I didn't collect or wasn't given to me? And then lastly here, there's a relations graph, which is really just a visual representation of her communication. So it consists of 2 rings. This inner ring is the persons, and the outer ring is the domain they came from. So I can visually see here that Sarah Shackleton has communicated with Clint 10 times, whereas she's communicated with Jim 9. The thickness of the line represents the volume of communications, right? So I can visually see who she's talking to more. And I can also see when these folks have been communicating amongst themselves, right? So I can see that Sarah's been talking to, whoever this is down here. It's hidden from me. But I can see that they've been talking to each other, right? And then this draft is driven by any filters I've applied. So again, the scenario here would be, maybe I've collected data from a year, but I'm only interested in just, this 90-day period of who she's been talking to, right? And then you'll see that dynamically updates my graph. Okay, and then at any point in time, I want to just save these documents to review them or start reviewing them right away. Again, it's just a right click. So and where that ties into concept analytics is the scenario of, okay, yeah, great. I've identified who Sarah Shackleton's been communicating with within this certain 90-day period. Now I want an idea of what they've been talking about, right? So the scenario here might be I save these documents. And then I come into concept analytics, and I build concept analytics on it, which is basically a word clustering tool. So for those set of documents, it's going to look for frequently occurring keywords and phrases and cluster documents that talk about something similar, right? So each one of these boxes represents a cluster of documents. So here, for example, is about 200 documents. What they all have in common is they all talk about credit support, right? Talk about credit support enough that Viewpoint believes this might be the parent topic of this cluster of documents. And then we further subdivide them into what we call child concepts, right? So really it's just a without knowing anything about your documents, it's just a way, an agnostic approach for Viewpoint to tell you or identify to you frequently occurring keywords and phrases. So how do you find yourself utilizing this technology, Pete, in your review?
So a couple of key ways, right? One is when we get stuff dumped on us. And I mean, generally, like everybody else, we issue targeted document requests and we get targeted document productions to us. But occasionally we'll get the overwhelming dump. Or maybe, targeted is still overwhelming just because of the nature of the matter. So the ability to just throw out all the data and just say to the powers on high, right? You tell me a story, right? Tell me what themes, what notions and concepts exist within you is really helpful, right? So we can throw in a set of data, and then before we've had a chance to really start in a more regimented fashion, figure out how we're going to try to dive in, just say, all right, well, what is the system thing? What does the data think the story is here? And then we can start looking through and finding things that might be super helpful and super helpful to know early on. So that can exist in a we need to analyze what's coming in an incoming production, and then sometimes the data that we're gathering can be large, and especially in some of our investigations-based practices, the time to knowledge is really key. So while people are, deciding how I want to go about searching this, or attacking a multi-mode approach, or setting up a predictive coding engine, just the ability to say, all right, well, while you guys are working on this, we're just going to have the machines tell us what they think is in there. And we can float up really helpful and useful concepts in really short order.
Got it. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Pete. So what I thought we would do now is I'm just going to spend some time in the browser-based interface, just to give everyone a flavor of that, and also that's going to allow us just to talk about some additional functionality. So I've got the browser interface here. One of the things I did want to just point out was I had mentioned that we support those various chat formats. I just wanted to show how we visually display that for the reviewers, right? So what you're looking at here is a Slack file that we process, right? So you'll see that it has the icon of the Slack application and just the general color scheme. This section up here is just some information about how many people are involved in this conversation, the time span of the conversation, and then we got the message down here. But you'll notice that on the different formats, they look very similar as far as their structure. We just changed the color, again, associated with the application. So even though it's totally different applications, they look very similar within Viewpoint. But then we also have some nice functionality as far as, in essence, removing clutter from reviewing of text. And I'm going to open up a Bloomberg file because I think that this demos best in a Bloomberg chat. So here, for example, I think this is a WhatsApp, which we had talked about, right? So Bloomberg, each one of these messages down here, right? Each one of these entries, it's either a message or sometimes it's somebody joining a conversation or leading a conversation or some sort of disclaimer, right? And those are very popular in Bloomberg format. So sometimes it's hard to read the message itself or get to the heart of the message itself because it's got this other clutter, right? So what all of these chat application chat viewers allow you to do is allows you to filter that information on or off, right? So again, here might be a scenario of I don't care about looking at when somebody joined or left a conversation, so I can uncheck those and they go away, or any sort of history information or message with disclaimers or attachments, right? I just want to get to the bulk of the conversation. I can turn off all that additional information, right? All that clutter. And I can even turn off, messages from, certain, participants or certain companies as well, right? And then so all of our chat functionalities has that filtering capability, which really makes it useful to get to that sort of the meat of the conversation you're interested in. Okay. So I want to talk about some of our Azure integration here before we wrap it up. So we do, we have integrated Azure Cognitive Services. The services we've integrated into that are audio transcriptions. So again, here might be the scenario of I have an audio file that I can certainly listen to, but if I wanted to transcribe this to text and read it as well, it's just a click of a button. So I come up here and click on Convert Audio Files to Text. And what we're doing is we're basically encrypting this file. We're sending it to the Azure environment where we're logging in with our Azure subscription. Azure's listening to this file, transcribing it to text, and it's sending the encrypted results back to Viewpoint, and you'll see that it just folded it here into the document viewer, right? So I can now read this document. I can search this document as well as listening to it. And you can even jump straight to certain sections of the document. So you'll see down here at my radio player, if I jump straight to a section of a document, it fast forwards me to that location and actually backs it up a couple seconds so I can listen to that in context, right? And you can do these in bulk as well. So if I wanted to, select all my WAV files or all my audio files, I could send those to be transcribed in bulk. Similarly, we offer translation services for foreign language documents. Azure supports 70 or 80 so different languages. It's all over the place here. 70 or so different foreign languages, and you can dictate the languages that a document is transcribed to, right? So even though there's 80 or so different languages, maybe you only want them to doing it in English, right? So you can limit that. So I'm just going to open up a document here that is, right? You'll see I have some documents here. Here's a document that happens to be in Japanese. If I wanted to translate this quickly into English, then I would come up to my text viewer and I click on the translate button. And this is where this list of languages that you can translate to, you can dictate what's on this list. If I want to translate it to English, click OK. And we're doing the same thing in the background here, and you'll see how quick that was. We basically encrypted this this original text file that was in Japanese, sent it to Azure, logged in with our subscription credentials. It translated it to English, encrypted the file, and sent it back to us. Right? And you can do these in bulk as well. So if I wanted to just filter down to all my documents that were in Hebrew, I could send those all in bulk. Now, this is sort of a selfish question of myself. Because I am the legal product owner for the development of Viewpoint, we have on the roadmap having the ability to produce or to export the translated text or the transcribed text. So we put the poll question up there just to kind of get an idea of, do you see that as a need? I've actually mentioned it to some folks during a demo, and they're like, oh my gosh, I would never want to do that. And other folks that'll be like, oh yeah, certainly we want to do that. And I can see from the poll, kind of split it there as well. Okay, so then the last analytics I wanted to talk about is the named entity. Oh, by the way, we also do sentiment analytics, right? Which is where you can send email and have Azure score it on basically the tone or the mood of the document, right? So was somebody happy or pleasant when they were writing the email, or were they not? Right, so that's another one that we provide. But named entity is the most recent, and then I'm going to finish up with continuous active learning. Named entity, the idea behind that is, for a set of documents, you can send it to be analyzed, and then Azure will pull out things, right? It pulls out entities, so it'll pull out, persons and places and addresses and phone numbers, right? And then it just categorizes those for you. So you can say, okay, I need to take a look at, a certain, email address, or I need to take a look at, certain phone numbers, or maybe I want to mass redact all the phone numbers, right? So under that scenario here, you could certainly use regular expressions, right? But maybe maybe you weren't sure whether they used a parentheses or a dot or a space, with those phone numbers. So what you can do is you can run named entity recognition, get a list of all the phone numbers, maybe see the patterns and add those to your regular expressions. So really, I think we're just scratching the surface on all the uses of this entity recognition, right? So you could use it for data breach. Our data breach and our incident response team use this quite a bit. So if we receive a set of data from a client and say, okay, I need to know what personal information from who was breached here, and then we can create these user profiles. So again, just scratching the surface on that. And then lastly here, continuous active learning, right? Viewpoint actually offers both methodologies, TAR 1.0 approach, where you do your seed set, you do your sample set, control set, but we also offer continuous active learning as well. And we generally get good feedback on the way that we visualize the continuous active learning metrics, right? So the scenario here is I've done a continuous active review on a set of 13,000 documents. And I have the system retraining itself every 400 documents. And, it'll go out after every 400 documents and, rescore the document population and then funnel to my review team, the most relevant documents. So I'm going to select over here. But what we do is, we visualize the metrics, right? So you might think to yourself, okay, what am I up against here, right? So even after only a couple iterations, Viewpoint's able to tell you about what percentage of the population it thinks you're going to need to review in order to meet your target. So this scenario here is my case team decided that they wanted to review and produce 85% of all the responsive documents in the document population. Maybe that's what they agreed to. And after each iteration, Viewpoint is able to anticipate, based on its current progress and review rate, when it believes you will have crossed that threshold. So here I can see that Viewpoint thinks that you'll have crossed that 85% threshold after reviewing 38% of the documents, right? And then this green line is where your review currently is. So you've currently reviewed 34%, so you're just about done with your review, right? And then you just have to make the decision of what do I want to do with the rest of these documents, right? Do I want to just sample them, just to confirm our understanding or our belief that there's very few responsive documents in it? Do I want to maybe isolate those documents and offload them to some sort of cheaper review costs? So again, without knowing anything about my review, right? Even after reviewing a first few hundred documents, I'm able to sort of get an idea of what ballpark am I playing. Okay, and that just kind of gives me an idea of Pete, do you guys find yourselves using continuous active learning more than maybe you used to?
Was that to me?
Yeah. Just kind of curious, if you guys have sort of jumped on the cow wagon or if you've been doing so for some time.
We have, and I think for the silliest of reasons, right, is that we're finally able to explain in pretty easy to understand concepts what's going on, and I just say the word Pandora, right, and then people are all, oh, I understand how this works now, right? 2 docs in, we're not very good at describing what it is that we want or need, but it's better than no docs in, and 20 docs in will be better still. So it's the continuous voting and the continuous understanding. So that's really helped that people understand what's going on and have a greater appreciation for it and desire to use it. Yeah,
and then again, just the metrics themselves, right? We can help you and your team, make those points or prove those points, right? So in this scenario here, real quick, is that the rest of these documents, right, are likely not responsive. Well, one of the ways that you can support that is to say, okay, well, look, there's 4,500 documents that scored between 0 to 5. We believe very few of those are responsive, and we can say that because of the 693 that also scored 0 and 5 and have been reviewed by a human reviewer, only 5 of them are responsive, right? So again, that's a pretty good sample size just to be able to show that, hey, Few of these documents are responsive, so we expect few of these documents to be responsive. And each one of these graphs, you can export the data to and sort of share it with your case team. Okay, I think we should need to wrap up here, Pete. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I do have some final thoughts here. So, like I mentioned, I'm in charge of, I'm the team that's in charge of the roadmap for Viewpoint. And we've got a lot of stuff cool on our roadmap that we're going to be adding to the tool, continuing to do 2 releases a year. But I had noticed when we were at Legal Week this year, one of the buzzwords was ChatGPT, right? And I was just wondering, what your thoughts were as far as, use cases for ChatGPT in an eDiscovery application.
So let's separate out ChatGPT from GPT 3.5, now 4, and my understanding is we'll have something orders of magnitude sometime in the fall. So I think the advances that GPT-4 has brought to us are nothing short of amazing. Certainly everybody on God's green earth is offering up some sort of Gen AI capability. So, I mean, everybody's saying Gen AI, everybody's saying LLM, but the breadth of things that these tools are going to be able to do is really quite breathtaking, right? Let's take that sort of model that comes in sort of pre-trained, and now let's feed in everything in our document management system, right? Or maybe we curate it. Maybe we draw a line, and we don't use the stuff from Pete because that guy's a bozo. But the other stuff, let's put that in, and then we can generate the documents, first drafts of pleadings, first drafts of contracts that are a long way towards getting the final product that we want. So everybody's got these tool sets out there. We are in the midst of investigating, which Gen AI and LLM step we want to take. There's a lot of caution that needs to be used at this point because it's really easy to say the words generative AI and LLM, and it's still pretty easy to generate a slide and maybe even a slideshow that indicates that you've made great strides. But the folks that are able to actually demonstrate live this capability are making tremendous strides. One of our folks was at a conference 2 weeks ago, and one of the folks there said it's going to be in very short order darn near malpractice not to use this sort of tool on the early drafts. I have no idea what that means for the future training of the younger associates. Other folks are going to be worrying about that while we worry about how do we, isolate the use cases, select a tool, and then implement with the right sorts of guardrails to make sure that we're continuing to deliver the same sort of work that we've been known for the past 100 years plus.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and we're excited to introduce that in an upcoming version of Viewpoint as well. So I think that really just sort of wraps it up for us. So Pete, any parting words here before we leave, or?
Well, just thanks everyone for coming, and of course I end as always, go Tigers.
All right, I appreciate it. Again, thanks Pete for joining, and thanks to ACEDS for the opportunity.